I'm Adam Pasquarella, and welcome to episode 30 of The Power of Bold.
From New York City, it's The Power of Bold, the podcast on risk-taking, entrepreneurship, and bold living. Join us as we interview world-class performers, analyze life-changing books, and gather actionable insights to help you achieve your goals. Here's your host, Adam Pasquarella.
Hey everyone, welcome to this 30th episode of the podcast. As always, I'm incredibly grateful that you've taken time out of your schedule to listen to this episode. Round numbers are always a cause for celebration, so I'm especially proud to bring you this 30th episode. I recently spoke with Brandon Webb, the author of an excellent new book called Mastering Fear. But before talking about the book, it's important to give you a sense of who Brandon is. He has an extremely impressive resume. He is a former U.S. Navy SEAL sniper and member of Navy SEAL Team 3, who has been deployed multiple times to the Middle East. Returning home, Brandon redesigned the core Navy SEAL sniper program and eventually left the military to become an entrepreneur, most prominently starting Hurricane Media, which includes such well-known websites like NewsRep Media. He is also the host of a podcast called The Power of Thought. So Brandon has had quite a career, and one which required him to confront fears that he had. That is what makes Mastering Fear such a great book. Brandon provides vignettes from his life and the lives of others he knows to present a framework so that we can use fear to our advantage, rather than having fear hamper and block our dreams and goals. If I could have envisioned a book that would have given me more confidence to pursue my entrepreneurial journey, this is very close to a book that I would have hoped for. In our conversation, Brandon and I discussed topics like the fears that he encountered in his career, how we can tackle our fear of the unknown, how visualization is one of the keys to making our fears seem less scary, and how knowing what matters is the most important thing, allowing you to take on your fears rather than back down when the stakes are the highest. It was an awesome discussion, and I'm sure you're going to like it. So without further ado, here's Brandon Webb. Brandon Webb, thanks for taking the time to appear on The Power of Bold.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm really excited to be speaking with you today because, you have quite a story and you write about topics that I really enjoy thinking about and discussing. Your most recent book is called Mastering Fear, and I think it's an outstanding book. Now, there are so many things that we can talk about in the limited amount of time we have, but before we get into the book, I always like having my guests share a little bit more about themselves. And because the book is titled Mastering Fear, I think an interesting way to do this is for you to speak about some key moments in your life where you experienced fear, kind of your relationship with it and how you responded to it, whether that response was effective or ineffective. So in your life, whether it's your childhood, your career in the military, your career as an entrepreneur, what were some of the biggest fears that you were forced to face, and how did you deal with them?
Sure. So I would say, looking back to my childhood, I can remember probably two things that pop out right away. It was my dad kicked me out of the house at 16. Only our house was a sailboat. We were on a family sailing trip in the South Pacific. Because I'd grown up working on boats since I was 12 years old, my dad and I just had a big fight and decided I was a stubborn, independent kid. And he said, "Hey, I think it's best if you leave." And so I got off our 47-foot ketch in Pape de Tahiti, found a boat that was sailing back to America, Hawaii, and looking for crew. So I jumped on the boat and then, grabbed my backpack. My mom is crying, my sister's crying, and then off I went, and then cried myself to sleep 4 nights straight, scared to death.
I'm sure.
I was like, okay, what the hell did I just do? And then kind of backing up, I'm also grateful. Like I don't think anybody has a perfect childhood. My parents were far from perfect, but I love them for being adventurous and letting both my sister and I do unusual stuff. Like my mom encouraged me when I was 12 to get this job on a scuba diving boat. And at the time, we were living on our sailboat in Ventura Harbor in California. And she said, hey, there's this diving boat that needs a kid to work summers and weekends and just help out. And the captain said he'll teach you how to dive, but it's for tips. And so I went and got the job. 6 months later, I probably had 50 dives under my belt. And I remember, and it was an amazing job. Like, this is a 65-foot boat with a hot tub, private chef. We would take divers out to the islands. I was like 13 at the time. Women are getting, naked in the hot tub. It was, as a 13-year-old boy, I was like, This is a dream job.
Right.
I was diving all these amazing spots, at least starting to. But I remember being a fairly novice diver, and we're at San Miguel Island. There's a bunch of islands off the coast of Central California that make up the Channel Islands, and we were at San Miguel Island, which is the northernmost, and it has a big sea lion population and seal population, and so we were out there. We had dove a few times that day. We anchored up for the night, had dinner, everyone went to sleep, and I was sleeping in the wheelhouse, and I get shaken awake at 2 a.m. by Captain Mike. And Captain Mike is crazy. Like, this is a guy that got sponsors to go hunt great white sharks with a spear gun. He's just nuts. And so Mike wakes me up at 2 a.m. and he's like, hey, Brandon, get your gear on. You got to go dive and get the anchor unstuck. And I had done that a few times in the daylight, but I was just right out of a REM sleep, and all I could think about was sharks. Like, we're in shark-infested water. This is where Captain Mike ran his shark hunt, chumming with blood for days, trying to attract a white shark.
And at this time, sharks, they're your number one fear. That's the thing you fear the most.
I think it's because the captain and crew, they're trying to a little bit haze me in a sense to kind of, always telling me, hey, watch out for sharks. I'm sure they even mentioned something that night. But I was terrified. I'm like, it's one of the, most shark infested areas in the Channel Islands, known to see great whites often. And I got to go dive all by myself at 2 a.m. in the dark with bad weather, where the bottom, I know the swell picks up, the bottom is getting churned up, so the visibility is not going to be very good. All this stuff was in my head, and I could just hear the jaw. And I just said, okay, I got to do this. And I ended up.
Sorry to interrupt. Was there a point where you thought, there's just no way I'm going to say no, I'm going to leave this job, it's just not worth the potential physical harm to me by doing this?
I think it was, I definitely did not want to do it, but I just, something in me said, I've got to do this. I've just got to do it.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking to myself, and I talk about this in the book, sometimes you just got to take small steps. SEAL training, when I went through in 1997, we started with 220, graduated 23, almost 7 months later. So there were days where I'm like, how in the hell can I do this for another 6 months? Mm-hmm. And sometimes you just have to go, you know what, I'm just going to finish this one thing and then get to lunch. And so I think fear a lot of times is like that. You just got to take it in small steps. And so I said, I'm gonna just put my wetsuit on, and then I'm gonna put my tank on, and then just do one thing at a time.
Yeah.
And then I remember, I dove down, and sea lions are whizzing by me. I could see the biolume kind of zooming by at night, and I can still see this massive ledge the size of a car with the chain wrapped around it, just heaving up and down. But I got the chain unstuck and finished the dive, and I was like, okay, that's not as bad as I thought it was going to be, and I did it. Mm-hmm. And it was like a small win. And I think that's a big part of fear, is no matter if it's big fear or small fear, if you can get into the habit of identifying fear in your life and then deciding to confront it, it just becomes a habit, because nobody is fearless. Anyone that tells me they're fearless, they're bullshitting me, or they're insane. They're insane, right? Those are the only two cases. The rest of us, we got to deal with fear on a daily basis.
Right. Because even if I think people read your book and think, oh, he's a Navy SEAL, he's an entrepreneur that's built a big business, maybe he's wired differently. Maybe he doesn't feel fear as strongly as I do as an average person. And so to that, you would say, no, I feel fear the same exact way. I just have more of a habit of acting. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say that's 100%. And I didn't do 15 combat deployments, but I did a couple combat deployments. I've had people shoot at me. I have never been as scared as leaving the Navy, starting a business, losing my first business, going on TV to talk about the stuff I'm doing in media now. Like it's scary stuff. I have almost 100 employees now, and there's times where I have an 8-figure business, but I still deal with fear on a daily basis. It's just how we deal with it that really, I think, determines whether or not you can use fear to propel yourself in the direction you want, or it becomes a limiting factor.
Right, and you spend a lot of the book talking about that. I think that's such an important discussion. But if I could circle back just a little bit to when you were training to become a Navy SEAL, and I'm personally fascinated about the training you guys do. It's really unbelievable. And like you were saying, I think 200 people started in your class, and you were one of 20 or 25 that made it. And so going into Navy SEAL training, it's something that you really want to do, yet you're facing these fears throughout training, like, oh, am I really going to make it? This is way too difficult for me. I'm sure that thought crosses every single candidate's mind. So how did you handle those fears and find the resilience to finish it?
It's funny. They do these psychological tests, and they have you fill out, what sports you played in school, and really what I figured out, like one common thing that people have in common that finish SEAL training is they've all dealt with adversity up to that point. Like they have an experience dealing with adverse environments. I knew a guy that was homeless, given up for adoption when he's 15 years old. Another guy, grew up in Iowa, had to work the family farm, 3 hours every morning before he even went to school. So stuff like guys like that show up, I think they've kind of dealt with adversity, and myself, right? I left home at 16. I finished school on my own. I'd been through a lot. I went to the regular Navy for a couple of years. Good experiences and bad experiences with that. But my first SEAL application was turned down, and I finally made it. And I can honestly say, like, it was, I think, the fear. I didn't have a fear that, or there was no time where I thought about quitting whatsoever. Like that, I can honestly say that never happened. But was I scared? Yeah, like scared to be in that environment. Yeah. And you think still, like, I'm not going to quit, but am I good enough to make it? Am I going to pass? Am I going to pass everything? Because there's more to just being, just putting up with cold water and getting yelled at. There's a lot of evolutions there. You get tested physically and mentally, and it was a great thing. And I think what people don't realize is once you get through that basic screening process, and it's about 7 months, it takes another 2 years before you actually are considered a trained up SEAL. And I know guys, I don't know the percentage, but I would guess SEAL training is about 90% washout. Once you get past that, it's about 10%. And the 10% are because a lot of guys can't be in a dynamic environment. Imagine, like, you live in New York City. Imagine going through a high rise with about 20 guys clearing room by room, floor by floor with live fire and not making a mistake. Like, we have to train to that level of perfection with live bullets. And even if you sweep somebody, like you put your muzzle, the pointy end of the gun crosses somebody's back Like that's a huge violation. So a lot of guys can't put it all together, and they wash out
Is there
at that
any
phase.
is there any equivalent to that sort of training in civilian life? Just to give people some context of the challenges that you had to face.
I don't think there's anything like it other than potentially, even like you come from a law background, that we have a saying in the SEAL teams, you have to earn your trident every day, which is your gold SEAL pin. And I think some professions have a similar ethos where whether it's a medicine, law, investment banking, where I see these individuals that they constantly have such a high level of performance, and the performance has to be near perfect all the time, and it doesn't stop. Like every time you go to work, you've got to bring your A game, and that's kind of what being in the SEAL team is like. You can't just rest on your laurels, because tomorrow is going to be a new challenge.
Right. And then the stakes are obviously physical with you guys versus making a typo or some other document that you edit in the legal field, for instance. So, but yeah, that attention to detail is super critical. And I guess just going back to fear. So you graduate from BUDS, the SEAL training, and you're in the military. You're deployed abroad. And can you talk about how your relationship with fear changed at that point, whether that was from training to active deployment, or even from active deployment to your career in business? How did your relationship with fear change?
I would say that by that point, I probably had a pretty good baseline for dealing with fear. I remember the next time in my career where I was dealing with some fear was I had a date on the books to go get free fall trained. The training back when I went through, you had to get a slot, like a billet for free fall training. Everybody got the basic static line, hook up your parachute to a cable and jump out of a plane with a round parachute and fall to the ground. But the real parachuting was steering a square parachute. So I finally got a class date, and I a few months before, I lost a friend of mine that I went through BUDS and SEAL tactical training. It was 3 months long. Mike Bearden. He was just this guy everyone loved. Everyone looked up to him. He was like this big brother you always wished you had. And he had died in a skydiving accident. It was like, well, it was one of those malfunctions that just come along, like just so rare, because he tried to cut away a bad parachute, and the bad parachute went into his reserve, and we call it a cigarette roll. It just gets tangled up, and it's just a terrible situation. But he died, and I was just like, man, if that can happen to Mike, that can happen to me. And I think everybody has a fear of heights. It's just natural. Some just maybe have it to a little bit higher degree. But I had to deal with that. I was really dealing with, wow, okay, I don't want to do this, but I just got to do it. And then skydiving ended up being something that I really enjoyed in the military. But, I would get nervous before every jump, just like giving a public appearance or public speech. There's that little bit of nervousness that always is there for me until I either start talking, or as soon as I would jump out of the airplane, it would just go away. But I think that fear is healthy. Like, it keeps you alive. It would cause me to do one more check of my equipment.
Sure.
Make sure everything's in place.
How did that transition happen from when you really feared jumping out of the plane to actually enjoying it? Was that because of just pure habit that you'd done it that many times and became maybe more comfortable with it, or how did that change of mindset occur?
I think it was a comfortability factor. And again, I think that it doesn't matter if it's skydiving or something else. It's what inspired the book was I became really good friends with Kamal Ravikant. He's one of my best friends. Kamal is an amazing guy. He's of technology venture capitalist, best-selling author. His brother founded AngelList, and Kamal is like a crypto guy. Like he's heavily into the crypto space, and him and I got to be really good friends. And I learned that he didn't know how to swim because he had this huge fear of the water. And we would have conversations about it, and he would say, yeah, it's really bothering me. I want to do something about it. And I said, well, look, let me teach you for a week. If you give me a week, I'll teach you how to swim. And he's like, I've had a lot of people try, Olympic swimmers. And I say, well, what do you have to lose? Like, I'll give you my time, 1 hour a morning, Monday through Friday. And so he agreed, and we went to the New York Athletic Club where I'm a member, and I got a lane cleared out, and I said, okay. And I had kind of designed a mini curriculum for him that took these baby steps on getting comfortable with the water, which I knew that was a big issue. I couldn't teach him how to swim. I had to get him semi-comfortable with the water itself. Right. And a lot of people that are really had never swam as a child, they have a big fear of putting their face in the water, like putting it in the water. And so that's what I did. I did drills with him for 15 minutes, face in the water, face out of the water, face in the water, like breathe out when your face is out, exhale underwater, over and over again. And this was like, Kamal was terrified. Like I remember he would climb in the pool with the ladder backwards, like barely let go and just grasp for the wall as quickly as he can. Yeah. It's like, I was a lifeguard and a rescue swimmer and a rescue diver. He's the kind of people that they teach you about. Like, you've got to learn how to get out of their grip because they grab onto you when they're panicked. Right. So that was Monday. Friday comes, he does a cannonball into the deep end, sinks himself down to the bottom, holds his breath for half a minute, and pushes up to the top. And and we do some drills. Now it's more like swimming down back and forth. Yeah. And I taught him to replace the wall with rolling on his back and just getting comfortable. Like that would be his new safe place that he would go to. And we took the subway back to Flatiron where we both live, and he's like, dude, you changed my life. Like, this is crazy. Like, you did something nobody else was able to do. You showed me how to kind of build confidence, over time. And I never thought I would be here, and you got to write a book about this. So that was the inspiration behind Mastering Fear. Yeah.
So for him, you said that he had been trying to do this for a while. He had teachers. So in addition to teaching him how to float or emphasizing that part, was there also just the mental shift of maybe embracing fear and not trying to avoid it, but trying to leverage it in a certain way? And if so, can you talk about how you did that?
Yeah, I think the thing and to be honest with you, there are a lot of great things that translate experiences and lessons learned in the SEAL community that translate to business and real life. And there are a lot of bad things. Like, you can't beat somebody up because you disagree with them. That happens in the SEAL team. Like, right. I've seen guys take it out back. So the thing, I was fortunate enough when I got back from Afghanistan, I got into training in 2002 and got asked to be a part of a group of instructors that modernized this Navy SEAL sniper course. And we're in a really unique position with budget enough to kind of get the best coaches in the world to come consult and say, how do we teach better? How do we get to such a high level of performance? And it's the one thing I do like about the special ops community in general. They're really early adopters and always looking for an edge. So, we went outside to the community, to professional sports, Olympic champions, and I ended up meeting a friend, a consultant we use, Lanny Basham, who's a close friend of mine today. Lanny, and I believe I talk about him in the book extensively.
Yeah, you do. He's an awesome person.
Yeah, Lanny's amazing. And so he taught us this system of mental management and positive psychology, visualization, how to get rid of the negative self-talk that we all deal with. And so I use that all on Kamal. Like I seen the results of that in our sniper school, where typically when I was in charge, we were losing 30% of the candidates. When we started changing the way we taught to more positive teaching style and really emphasizing the positive psychology and mental management aspect, we started graduating everybody. Mm-hmm. And I started using it on my kids even, and I saw the effects. I was coaching sports, Little League, and saw the same thing. And so it was something I'm just grateful for experiencing during that last few years I was in the SEAL teams. But for sure, I used it on Kamal. I told him to go home and visualize every night. That was part of his homework. And I said, you need to start thinking of yourself as a swimmer now. Like you've had this narrative in your head that you're not good enough, you can't swim. Like you got to change that, and you got to start talking to yourself differently. And I think that played a big impact. And the thing was, I didn't just start teaching him stroke. I knew I had to take small steps to build a little bit of confidence and then take another step. Mm-hmm. Build up a little more, take another step. And I think in how that works for fear is, I talk about it in the book, is if it's a big fear or small fear, you put it into the system, and sometimes, you've got to give it some practice. Some people can just go, you know what, I've got this fear and I'm going to go do it. But other people, even you and I talked about before the show, like big things like career transition, it's scary stuff. I was there myself. I lost my first business. I got divorced. I owed people money, and I had to take a job. I got this amazing job with L3 Communications, making more money than I ever made in my life. And then I remember a few of my friends thought I was crazy for leaving. They're like, how can you leave this? Like, you just you lost everything. Now you got this amazing job where you're making probably close to top 1%, 3% income. And I was like, look, I'm just not happy. Mm-hmm. I would rather, be a dive master in the Bahamas than do this job. So I just said, I've got to leave. And I also thought, you know what, I've done a good enough job here. And you're probably in a similar situation where in reality, even if you left a year later, you could probably come back and get a job in law. Sure. But we're so gripped by these fears sometimes, and you just go, oh, well, maybe I won't get a job.
Yeah, and that goes exactly to this fear of the unknown. I think it's a really common thing, and basically the anxiety anticipation is really just a result of your mind jumping to conclusions. And it's frustrating to me, and I'm sure some of the other listeners, because sometimes you can even recognize it when it's happening. It's just a figment of your imagination, yet you still feel the fear, and it is difficult to act and to actually take that risk. So
100%.
Do you have any advice for some of the listeners that may even recognize that these fears are unlikely to ever happen? It's probably a figment of your imagination, but that still slows them down from achieving their goals. Like, what should they do in that situation?
I think that's why I talk about knowing what matters at the last part of the book, because when you really think about what matters to you in life, like what are the truly important things to you, that kind of helps put things into perspective and maybe reframes the thinking. Mm-hmm. I had a friend in the city here who, his parents pushed him to be a doctor. He became a doctor and was absolutely miserable. And it's similar to practicing law. It's a big investment of time and money to go to law school. And I think medicine is probably at least twice as long. Yep. And, but he had the guts to just leave it. He's like, you know what? I'm not happy doing this. So I'm going to find something that does make me happy, because I know that life's too short. But I feature a lot of stories in the book, like real life stories, because I wanted, I'm a member of a Young Presidents Organization. We have a practice that we do where we share from experience. We can't give each other advice, but we share from experience. And then by experience, if somebody, shares a similar experience to maybe a problem I'm dealing with, that kind of gives me some better perspective and says, wow, like this successful person also had a major issue like this. So, being vulnerable in the book and having my friends kind of open up to their vulnerabilities, I think hopefully will show people that they're not alone. Like everybody deals with fear. It doesn't matter if you're, a professional athlete, a celebrity, whatever. Like everybody deals with this stuff. Mm-hmm. I love my friend Betsy's story, who is similar to you. She made the jump from traditional cable TV executive at CBS to go run the Huffington Post. I think she was the first professional CEO they hired. And she's like, wow, I was making this jump from TV rising star executive to the internet. And Les Moonves, the guy's in charge of CBS, pulls her into his office and is like, Betsy, what are you doing? Nobody's ever going to read the news on the internet.
Right.
Yeah. But she did it, and it was the right move to make.
And she did that because she knew what mattered, just the value of maybe, challenging herself in her career or things like that.
I think in Betsy's case, it was she was reading the world and saw that she wanted to be in a more exciting space. She wasn't getting the kind of satisfaction, and she could see that TV was largely a dead or dying industry. I mean, you look at, I went to Cannes Lions this year because I run a media and products company, and there was no Fox, MGM, or any of these like big media players. It was Twitter, Instagram, Netflix. Like it's like all these old TV and film studios have been completely disrupted by the internet and content. I mean, a 12-year-old in Russia could have a YouTube channel with 10 million followers that watch them play video games. I mean, the landscape has totally changed. It's still changing today, but it's not the three networks that it used to be.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the discussion, knowing what matters, it's part of your 5-leg action plan to confront fear. And the first 4 legs are decisions, rehearsal, letting go, and jumping off. And I thought it was a really cool framework to use when thinking about fear, especially if you have a big decision to make in the near future. And so just to give the audience a little more context, I was thinking we could speak about these 5 legs in the context of, say, a person wanting to leave a corporate job to start a business or take a career risk. And so first, like looking at decisions, I thought that was interesting that you put that first. And, it's not necessarily thought or thinking about it for weeks or months. It's making that actual decision. And I love that because this podcast is about taking action. So that spoke to me. Can you explain to the listeners why you put that first and why deciding is so important?
I think the deciding part is important because you have to recognize, first of all, what fear is, that you're dealing with or maybe holding you back. I like the decision part because you make like a conscious decision in your head. It was, I think I tell this story in the book of my friend James Altucher, like incredibly successful guy, but a little bit shy. You could tell just by meeting him. But he had a huge fear of public speaking, and he just said, "You know what? I'm deciding." Similar to my friend Kamal, he's like, "I'm gonna decide to do something about it." And when, Kamal and I were talking to each other, it was clear he had made the decision he was going to do something. I just offered as his friend to help. But in James's case, he said, "You know what? What's the worst kind of environment I could put myself in? The most challenging environment." To get over my fear of public speaking, he said, "I'm going to go take a stand-up comedy class in New York City."
Yeah. That is probably the most terrifying thing he could do.
Yeah. I mean, you live in New York, so you get it. I mean, it's like you're getting it is not anything but a hostile audience in
That's right.
New York comedy clubs. But he made that decision and decided to take action. So I just, when I wrote the book with John, I learned a lot about it myself and I used to design curriculum in the military, and so I said, okay, I've got to develop some type of system. But the decision just seemed to naturally come first, and so that's why I put it up front.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And also in this section, you say you have to, follow your gut at a certain point when making that decision. You may think of all of the potential things that can go wrong, but you have to listen to your intuition and still do it. And you also speak about the danger between the guts and the ego when making that decision. Can you maybe explain that a little bit more and why people should acknowledge that difference?
Yeah, I think it's a great thing to talk about, because I think too many people, there's a big difference between intuition and your kind of, call it gut feeling, right? Than having an emotional reaction. I think people get the two confused in some cases, because they'll have an emotional reaction and mistake that for gut feeling, and that's not the case at all. I think intuition is that kind of feeling that you probably had in your law career, where you're like, this just isn't working out for me. You just know it in your gut.
Yeah. And
that's the difference. It's not, some emotionally charged decision. You just know that's what I mean by trusting intuition. Because there's a reason we, I'm sure there's been scientific studies on it, but even that, what was that guy? Malcolm Gladwell wrote that great book. I think it was Blink, right? That dealt with the intuition. It's valuable. It's experience. And to not pay attention to it is a mistake, I think.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like the main way to judge between the gut and the ego is that the gut is just present for a longer period of time, and the ego is more of an instant reaction to something. Would you say?
Well, I think with concern, when we talk about ego, I think ego is a little bit different than what I was trying to make the distinction between the intuition part. I just wanted people to be clear on their ego. I think is different. Where it was tough for me to even open up about failure at my first business. Mm-hmm. and I think a lot of that was ego, right? I had this ego, I'm a Navy SEAL, I did all this stuff, I've never quit, I've never failed at too much before, but now I've failed at my first business, I failed at my first marriage, I think the reason I brought the ego up is because I think it can get in the way of moving forward. I mean, we've all seen people in situations where their ego kind of gets the best of them, or something happens and they're just afraid to do something because they're supposed to be this certain person or a certain way. To me, it's much more liberating to let the ego go, to be completely vulnerable with people. When I could just meet somebody and tell them, yeah, I've lost a business before. I've lost a lot of money, my own and friends and family money. And when you're kind of open up and vulnerable with people, I think it's just more powerful and liberating.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And so from there, you make the decision. Then you go into rehearsal, and in the book you speak about Lanny Bassam, like we discussed, and kind of the idea of visualizing success and not focusing on the negative or what could potentially go wrong. And so when you're visualizing, if we could just go back to this a little, are you how much detail are you recommending that people use? Like, should they be like in the moment, like smelling what it smells like seeing everything that should be happening? Like what should they be doing?
So I think there's levels of visualization. I've used visualization. I remember I couldn't get much flight time. I'm a pilot. I love aviation and I take it seriously. And I was getting my instrument rating and I couldn't get I think it was weather. The weather was not good enough. So I couldn't get my flights in before I took my exam with the FAA examiner. And I remember, okay, I'm going to do these flights, close my eyes and visualize the whole flight, shooting and approach. So that's a very complex visualization, but it's totally doable. And I would just practice that over and over. And then when I took my check ride, I aced it. And so, I think there's levels of visualization. It just depends on what you're trying to accomplish. There's a simple visualization where I was swimming masters just for exercise, but I was a really strong swimmer, but I never swam competitively outside of maybe, a 10, 11-year-old at a few swim meets. I didn't have really good technique, but I would watch these Olympic swimmers on YouTube and then just visualize. I was trying to get a better flip turn. So I was watching Phelps and I just started visualizing my flip turns over and over and over, perfect, just like I was seeing it done for me on the video. And so that's a very simple visualization. The reason I mentioned visualization in the book is just it's a proven method to get yourself comfortable with something. Skydiving is another thing. I would even I would be on the plane visualizing my exit that I was about to do a few minutes later. So I think just visualizing it's like practicing. Your mind doesn't know the difference. And so the reason I talk about visualization, because I think it will be a really helpful tool for people that they're making this crazy story up in their head that we talked about at the beginning of the podcast. And in most cases, it's not as bad as what we think or make up. And the visualization gets you comfortable without real stakes involved.
Yeah.
And so if you can imagine yourself a life of, career change or doing something, maybe it's public speaking that you're really afraid of, and you can put yourself in that situation. And I've done it with skydiving. Like I can feel myself getting nervous and I'm like, okay, this is, the ramp comes down, I'm going to do this. And when you do it over and over again, and then when it happens, it's just a lot easier to actually let go at that point, right? Mm-hmm. Which is the part I talk about next. And the letting, it's, one of the stories I share in the book about my own father. Like I have a lot of respect for both my parents, being so adventurous. I don't know too many parents that would take their kids on a sailing trip halfway around the world at a time where we didn't even have GPS, right? Yeah. We had dead reckoning, a sextant to take sun and star sightings, right, and make calculations. And I remember we did get a sat nav, but that was like, if we're lucky, we would get a satellite position every 12 hours.
Mainly you're on your own, pretty much.
Yeah, you're on your own in the middle of the ocean. And so, but I remember my dad telling the family one night at dinner, he said, look, I don't want to be the guy that's always talking about taking this trip and never takes it. He's like, I'm not going to be that guy. So he's like, that's why I really want to do this as a family. And I didn't even think about it back then, but it stuck with me today. And I think, we see there's so many people I run into that were like, man, I always wish I had taken this trip. I always wish I had done this. Mm-hmm. And that was an important lesson I learned from my dad to not, to go do it, just do it.
Yeah. especially if you're not ready, if you don't feel like you're ready to do it.
Yeah, because you're never. It's like having kids. Like you're never. I mean, when are you going to be ready? Who says? Like, where's the magic ready light? Isn't just going to pop on,
right?
You know?
Yeah, you just got to do it.
Yeah, you just got to do it.
Yeah.
And I think another gift, and really what I said, I try and always look at the positive in a situation. I lost a couple of close friends of mine after 9/11, and it taught me the value of time. And life is too short. And I really, that's the gift I take from these friendships I have with these guys that are no longer here, and including, my close friend I lost in Benghazi. He's one of the SEAL CIA contractors that died rescuing the ambassador. Every time I'm afraid, I can hear Glenn's voice, and it's like, hey, you should do this.
Yeah.
Like, what are you waiting for?
Yeah.
And I think that's been a lesson I think a lot of people learn later on in life into their old age that I've been fortunate enough to learn pretty young, and a lot earlier than a lot of people, because it's just, life is too short. I mean, I don't know if I talk about it in Mastering Fear, but I've done this exercise before where you want to scare yourself, go put your life, you can almost take a calendar and like shrink the boxes by half, and you could put, like, say we all live to 90 years, put those years in days on the back. They fit on the back of one door. You know what I mean? And that's a pretty humbling thing. You could just X off a day each day as you go, and like your life will fit on the back of a door.
Yeah.
That's pretty humbling, and it puts things into perspective. Like, what are you waiting for? Like, go out there and start confronting these fears you have,
and just try. And then once you do that, like in the jumping off section, you build this habit of taking action. And I think you'd argue that it just becomes easier if you're the sort of person that does these sort of things. The fear will still be there, but you'll have a game plan of how to tackle it and still move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the best Father's Day gifts I've ever gotten. Was this Father's Day, my 13-year-old daughter Olivia made me this video and sent it to me. She's like incredibly smart and loves, like, she's really artistic, and she starts making movies on her iPad. So she made this short movie for me, and in there she talks about she's showing these clips of us taking skiing trips, and I take them flying in my airplane, and she's thanking me as a 13-year-old for showing her how to make a habit out of confronting fear and doing what she loves. Like, I mean, I've watched this thing 20, 30 times. I cry like a baby every time, but it's just like, I'm like, it's so satisfying to know that as a parent, teaching these lessons and actually seeing them apply it. Like, she emceed her whole eighth grade, end of year celebration last year. The kids going into high school as freshmen, emceed the whole event in front of parents, students, and I'm like, I would be terrified as an 8th grader to do that.
A lot of adults would too.
Yeah, I'm like, there's no way I would.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's just pretty cool to see the kids doing it.
Absolutely. And so just to wrap up here, I always ask my guests one thing that listeners can do to put their ideas into practice, and so I'll ask the same of you. If a listener has a really deep, overarching fear of something, whatever it is, what can they start doing at the end of this episode to help them master their fear?
I would say, it's hard to answer this with one thing, but the thing I talk about, the reason I get into knowing what matters is I think that's so important these days, because I see a lot of people drifting through life without really understanding like what truly matters to them. And for example, I have a lot of, now that I'm an entrepreneur and built a business, people follow me on Instagram and say, hey, how do I be rich? I'm like, what is rich to you? Have you even thought about the number? And most people don't have any idea on what that number is. And And it could, because like time is finite, you can only spend so much money. And I did an exercise in business school where we figured it out what it was. It's about $400,000 a year. Like we all did the exercise, like what's your perfect year? And we all got to within a few $1,000s of each other. And then when you go, okay, that's the best life. That's like the ultimate dream life, and I'm not talking about mega yachts or anything within reason, right? But sure. Vacations, housekeeper, whatever. It's about $400,000. And then you back into the math and go, okay, well, how much do I have to have in the bank or invested to produce that kind of passive income? And it's roughly about $10 million. And so there you go. Like that's, but most people don't think about it. They just think I want to be rich, and they don't think about, really what that means to them. So that's why I get into what matters, because that could be, people say, I want this life or I want that life, but really focusing on what you want, and then figure out what's in the way. And usually if it's a fear, I think visualizing and changing it, if I could pick one thing, it would be self-talk. Mm-hmm. Changing the way that you talk to yourself right now. Like, we all have the voices creep in. I have a mantra. I read every morning, and sometimes when I'm off center, because I'm human like everybody else. This summer we had my companies. We spend several $100,000 on social media ads, mm-hmm. and we got shut down. Facebook is a big channel for us, and we got shut down. Our whole ad set, we lost probably $450,000 in revenue in a couple weeks. Talk about terrifying. Yeah. I went back. I was freaking out, and I went back to my mantra. I'm like, okay, things are going to be okay. Like we'll get through this. But I think the self-talk would be probably one of the most things I would recommend. Absolutely, is changing that conversation in your head. And I think that, whatever you call it, mantra, writing down the kind of person you want to be and the positive kind of affirmation stuff. And when you hear that negative self-talk creep into your head, pull it up on your smartphone and read it to yourself, and it really start reprogramming the way that you talk and think about yourself is a huge part.
Well, that's awesome stuff. And honestly, it's something that I've heard again and again on this podcast, just changing the way that you communicate with yourself. It's such an important thing. And well, thank you so much for taking the time to, speak about your experiences fighting fear in the book. I highly recommend the book. It's terrific. And before we go, where can people find you if they're interested in your story, the book, your podcast, any of your other current work?
Sure. My website is BrandonTylerWebb.com. It's BRANDON, Tyler Webb with 2 B's.com. And then my Instagram is at Brandon T. Webb. And I'm pretty active on Instagram. I don't think I have one unanswered message on there, because I've had a lot of people read the book and reach out. And I like having fun with Instagram, like engaging with people, so they can definitely find me there, and happy to answer questions and get feedback.
Well, very good. We'll put all of that in the show notes. So thanks again, Brandon. This was great. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I appreciate what you're doing. It's good stuff. We need more people like you in the world.
I appreciate it. Thanks again.
Have a good one.
Once again, that was Brandon Webb, a former Navy SEAL and current entrepreneur who recently released a book titled Mastering Fear. If you are facing some career risk or some dream that you want to accomplish, yet fear is holding you back, I'd highly encourage you to check out the book. It certainly provides great ideas and a unique perspective on how you can master your fear to achieve your goals. It's a quick read and may give you just the spark you need. So that's it for this episode of The Power of Bold. You can find the show notes and transcript of this episode at thepowerofbold.com. And as always, we appreciate your reviews of the show on iTunes or Google Play. Until next time, take care.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Power of Bold. For show notes and a transcript of this episode, visit thepowerofbold.com. Feel free to get in touch by visiting our Facebook and Twitter pages. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or Google Play. We'll see you next time.